What matters is action. Explosions at tankers, oil refineries, and chemical plants in Russia continue. Meanwhile, President Zelenskyy is preparing for key international meetings, while the Russian and Chinese leaders show little interest in dialogue. We're discussing this now on YouTube channel 24. I'm Iryna Uzlova, and with us is political strategist Taras Zahorodniy. Taras, great to see you. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.
Доброго дня, героям слава.
Так само нагадаю нашим глядачам, що вони можуть дивитися трансляцію цього інтерв'ю на ютубі пана Тараса. Активне посилання просто в описі під цим відео. Заходьте, переходьте, там ще більше аналітики від пана Загороднього зі мною та моїми колегами.
I've been wanting to discuss this topic since yesterday, Taras, because it is really resonant. This is the sixth tanker since the beginning of the year that has entered Russian ports and suffered an explosion. In the port of Ust-Luga, an explosion occurred on the Eco-Witzer tanker, which probably caused an ammonia leak. This was reported by the Insider and later confirmed by other media. The cause is a technical malfunction. The explosion occurred during ammonia injection at the terminal of Eurochem. The vessel's hull was damaged and water began to flow through. The tanker began to sink and the crew was evacuated. According to marine traffic, the vessel is flying the flag of the Marshall Islands and arrived in Cereda from Belgium. The question arises, why are such incidents becoming more frequent? And why does Belgium allow a vessel flying the flag of the Marshall Islands to depart from its territory again? Ammonia is a dual-use chemical. It is used to make both fertilizers and explosives. In this case, it was probably intended for export. It's good that such facilities explode, because it's a signal that you shouldn't transport hazardous substances, including oil. It is also a hint that oil may be next. We are moving towards Europe, which means we have to comply with environmental standards. If something explodes, it should at least be more environmentally friendly than an oil leak. The main task is to completely block the work of the Baltic Sea ports. If there are explosions and accidents there that did not happen before Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, then this is natural. The ports must stop functioning. As for the Europeans who allow the transportation of such substances, it is worth reminding you that this is chemistry. And although they often talk about gas, we should not forget that they continue to buy fertilizers.
України. Значить, так воно і повинно бути. Порти Балтійського моря повинні взагалі припинити працювати. А те, що європейці пропускають, ну дивіться, це ж хімія. І от, на жаль, у нас часто говорять про газ і про все інше, а добрива вони купують.
Fertilizers are actually gas processed with high added value. The Europeans are still allowing its transportation, but who is to say that the cargo will definitely reach its destination? Ukraine has not given any guarantees, and no one has asked for them. What are the complaints then? The trend is clear. The more such incidents occur, the fewer people are willing to ensure such transportation, and the harder it will be to find crews and companies willing to transport oil products or other cargo. It is becoming clear that for some reason, entering Russian ports is risky for both health and finances, and generally inexpedient.
Знаєте, страхувати менше такі суда будуть, проходити їм буде важче, знайти буде важче людей, які будуть перевозити ці або нафтопродукти, або інші продукти. Буде всім зрозуміло, що чомусь за дивним збігом обставин, заходити в російські порти чомусь і шкідливо і для здоров'я, і для фінансового здоров'я, і взагалі не дуже правильно.
Taras, given that such events are harmful to Russia, can it somehow protect its tankers from such systematic incidents? Let them try. The cruiser Moskva could not be protected, although it was one of the most important warships, and there are even more tankers. It is impossible to provide escort for each one. How many tankers pass through every day? How many navies are needed to protect them? And who says that a warship guarantees security? For example, strikes can be carried out according to a scheme similar to the one used against strategic bombers. A car drives up to the airfield, opens the roof, and launches drones. This is also possible at sea. A fishing vessel or yacht passes by, and a drone is launched from it and flies towards the tanker. This is quite realistic. It is difficult to identify the drone. Its origin is unknown.
Рибацька шхуна чи яхта, з неї якийсь дрон невідомий, звичайно, випливає і летить в бік цього, летить в бік, наприклад, танкера. Може ж бути, може ж бути. Що це за дрон? Хто ти такий?
It is not known where the drones are launched from. This is a kind of flying over the tanker's nest. A few days ago, it became known that Russia cancelled the main naval parade that was to take place in St. Petersburg on Sunday, July 27th. The official reason for cancelling the parade was security, according to propaganda media. While foot soldier training on Senate Square took place, the parade itself was cancelled, and no public rehearsal was held. Unofficially, the decision was also linked to security concerns. Ships won't go to the Kronstadt raid, and there will be no aviation. The parade wasn't held last year either. So why the cancellations? Lack of time due to tanker escorts or simply nothing left to show? Tankers may be monitored, but even the fleet in St. Petersburg has become uncomfortable for various reasons. In general, the situation on the territory of Russia demonstrates serious internal problems. Russians are increasingly complaining. For example, the implementation of the Keir plan, which is a blockade of airports that leads to losses for airlines and disruption of the country's transport unity. Frequent mobile internet outages also cause significant economic losses. The question arises as to how the state can function in such conditions. Often in the West, it is said that Ukraine is not capable of defeating Russia. But who said that? If you constantly hit critical points, strike at infrastructure, undermine the economy, and block the ports of the Baltic and Novorossiysk seas, it leads to collapse. And then the question arises, how to save Russia itself?
Чого, хто сказав, знаходити такі точки, постійно кошмарити їх, працювати над розпадом їхньої економіки, порти Балтійського, Новоросійського моря, так, і колапс, і спробуй тепер врятуй цю Росію.
Ukraine is moving in the right direction, particularly with regard to airport lockdowns. Drones don't even have time to appear in the vicinity before the alarm is immediately raised. Mobile communications are cut off, systems are shut down, and it works. This is exactly how it should be. Pressure from within, destabilization. Later, Ukraine will be able to turn to its Western partners, who still doubt its chances, and say, look, Russia is not able to guarantee security even on its own territory. What are we talking about? Who are you trying to save? This is the only way to talk to them, because otherwise they don't understand, and we can see it clearly.
На своїй території. Ви про що взагалі говорите? Ви з ким взагалі? Кого ви там збираєтесь рятувати? Ні, з ними тільки така може бути розмова.
The conversation continues in the language of attacks. In Krasnodar Krai, Russian public media reported that a drone hit the Ilya oil refinery. This is not the first case. According to the Russian side, everything went according to plan. There were no injuries, and all targets were allegedly downed. Meanwhile, Andriy Kovalenko, a representative of the leadership for countering disinformation, reported an attack on the Krasnozavodsk chemical plant in Moscow Oblast. The enterprise produces explosives, powders, and components for ammunition and missiles, key to Russia's supply of artillery, rocket systems, and ballistic missiles. Russia's defense ministry reported downing 91 Ukrainian drones, with confirmed flights over multiple regions, including Moscow, Belgorod, and occupied Crimea. The strikes targeted critical military infrastructure, including oil refineries and chemical plants.
Новгородська, Тверська, Тамбовська, Ленінградська, Орловська, Владимирська, Краснодарський край теж там, та Республіка Крим незаконно анексований, наш Крим, нагадаю. Ну, ж, по-перше, географія, пане Тарасе, доволі таки, бачимо, обширна. Ну і, по-друге, і НПЗ, і хімзавод, значення цих цілей.
The chemical plant produces explosives, as far as I know. Currently, targeted strikes are being carried out against enterprises that are critical nodes in the production chain. For example, Shahed drones are manufactured in Yelabuga, It is difficult to fly directly to the plant itself, but it is possible to hit the companies that supply components, such as batteries. Recently, one of these plants was also hit. Without batteries, it is impossible to assemble a drone or missile. The same goes for explosives. That's why strikes are now targeting these vulnerable points. Last week, the situation in Russia was tense. There were reports of drones, shooting, and explosions. And it is right. It should be so. We have repeatedly spoken about the need to blockade the ports and the military base in Novorossiysk so that they cannot launch caliber missiles from there and are unable to operate at all.
На минулому тижні неспокійно було Новоросійську, так, вони там говорили, що і дрони залетіли, щось там стріляло, кричало і так далі. Ну, неспокійно, так воно і повинно бути. Тобто це те, що, знову-таки, ми з вами неодноразово говорили, от порти Новоросійська, військова база Новоросійська, щоб вони там не могли вилізти взагалі звідси, щоб калібри не мали можливості запускати.
These are the vulnerabilities of Russia that undermine it from within. It is noticeable how they are trying to move air defense systems, either to the territory of Russia itself or to the temporarily occupied Donetsk region, and from there to Crimea. But it is impossible to cover everything. There are no resources. Even the Soviet Union, which was much more powerful than today's Russia, was not able to provide full-fledged air defense throughout its territory, even in strategically important cities. And this was in the days when we were talking about missiles and fighter jets, not drones. Today, any car can drive up and strike. It is impossible to install air defense systems near every oil refinery, oil pipeline compressor, or industrial facility. It is physically and technically unrealistic.
І це йшлося не про дрони, йшлося ж про ракети та йшлося про винищувачі. А зараз, коли у вас кожна машина може під'їхати і довбанути, не можеш ти біля кожного НПЗ, наприклад, поставити систему ППО, щоб це закрити. Або якщо біля МПЗ поставили, наприклад, біля кожного компресора, який качає нафту по нафтопроводу, або біля кожного заводу.
This is completely impossible, especially given the size of Russia's territory. That is why this tactic will continue to be effective. Ukraine has received much more means for attacks, which is evident from the growing intensity of the strikes. There are now real opportunities to block the Russian economy, in particular through strikes on critical nodes such as oil refining, chemical industry, and other strategic facilities.
Можливості для блокування і економіки Росії, для блокування таких от вузьких місць, як нафта, хімічна промисловість та багато іншого значно більше.
Thank God, we already have over 1,000 viewers and the number is growing. Dear friends, if it's not too much trouble, please like this conversation. It will help promote it on YouTube. Also subscribe to the 24th channel and to Mr. Taras's channel. The direct link to Mr. Taras's YouTube is in the description below this video. Taras, Donald Trump is returning to active politics. Responding to why the U.S. supports Israel more than Ukraine, Trump said America is providing significant aid against Russia. Speaking at a New Jersey airport, he stated, "I'm helping Ukraine, helping a lot," and added the war wouldn't have started if he were president. He also mentioned a recent good phone call with Zelenskyy on July 3rd. Earlier, Trump twice expressed disappointment with Putin. Taras, do you think Trump is truly helping Ukraine enough?
Згадав глава американської держави про нещодавню добру, як він сказав, телефонну розмову з президентом Зеленським. А нагадаю, перед тим, 2 рази за 2 дні, Трамп казав, що він розчарований Путіним, і телефонну розмову з ним, яка 3 липня відбулася з Зеленським, а в п'ятницю 4-го. Пане Тарасе, ну що ж, допомагає достатньо нам Трамп?
It is obvious that Trump is already putting into his rhetoric the fact that he is actively seeking opportunities to supply the Patriot. There is little doubt about that. But there may indeed be problems with these systems. I was recently interested in the statistics on the production of missiles for Patriot. Their volumes are small, because the system was not designed for mass use. It seems that about 300-500 missiles are produced per year, and this is for the whole world. For Ukraine, in order to shoot down one ballistic missile, it is necessary to launch 2 or 3 Patriot missiles. If 10 missiles are shot down, This is already 2030 missiles, which is up to 10% of annual production. This is a serious burden even for the United States. Therefore, there may be objective reasons why the United States is reconsidering its supply strategy, not only for Ukraine, but also for other countries. Whether Trump is helping is a complicated question, but the very fact that he is voicing support shows that there is a demand among American voters. Public opinion in the United States generally remains on the side of Ukraine, and this makes politicians look for opportunities to help. As for the Patriot system and other air defense systems, the issue is likely to be resolved, as the missiles have already been allocated, and they are likely to arrive in Ukraine. As for other areas, it depends more on Europe and the development of domestic production. We need to invest in production so that we are not dependent on external decisions, policy changes, or delays. Ukraine needs to develop its own defense capabilities, in particular to create Patriot analogs, especially since the technological base for this exists.
Сказав, не сказав, з якої ноги став, помінялася політика і багато чого іншого. Тобто ресурс туди треба вкладати для того, щоб ми самі себе забезпечували, намагатися робити аналоги патріотів, тим більше знов-таки технології такі існують.
We must rely on our own strength first and foremost, and consider any external assistance as an additional bonus. Ukraine has experience, a rocket school, engineers, and technology. I consider cooperation with Sweden to be the most promising direction, as it is also located in the Baltic Sea basin and understands well what happens when ammonia ships explode in the ports of St. Petersburg. As for Israel, when it is mentioned as an example, I always remind, the United States did not help Israel for the first 20 years. It was simply ignored, considered a failed state, even though it had an influential Jewish diaspora in America. Israel did not wait for something to be given to it. It created its own weapons, modernized tanks, and produced airplanes. In 1973, with only 2.5 million people, the country already had its own aircraft industry. The Mirages they copied were blueprints stolen from the French. Imagine that Kyiv has its own military program. Everything depends primarily on us. All external resources should be seen as additional support. There are risks that we can control and influence, and there are those that are beyond our control. For example, we cannot guarantee whether the missiles will arrive, because each country primarily cares about its own interests and the consequences of its decisions. Taras, when you mentioned Israel, it is worth noting that today Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is meeting with Donald Trump at the White House. The day before, the Associated Press published details of a possible ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. Netanyahu is determined to return the 20 hostages alive and the bodies of the 30 dead. He said Israel is determined to return all captives and eliminate the threat from Gaza. Reports suggest Trump may announce an end to hostilities there ahead of a scheduled meeting. If Hamas agrees to a peace deal, Trump could use this as leverage in the context of the war in Ukraine. Whether he can influence that situation remains unclear, but a ceasefire in Gaza could signal shifts in other global conflicts too. Israel does not seem to stop until it destroys Hamas and strikes Iran. They are acting gradually, demonstrating outward readiness for dialogue, but at the same time achieving their strategic goals. They already have a good understanding of how to negotiate and have probably studied Trump's approach. They do not object to his initiatives, agree to discuss peace, but at the same time eliminate the Hamas leadership and related structures. And then they can say, Trump, we have news. There are no more negotiators. We sincerely wanted to negotiate, but now it is impossible because there is simply no one left on the other side. At the same time, they will thank him for his efforts and emphasize his role in the pursuit of peace, even if everything was actually resolved militarily.
Перемовників просто не існує, так? А ми так хотіли з ними домовлятися, ви собі навіть собі не уявляєте. Але оскільки немає там знаєте, ми припиняємо перемовини за відсутності сторони перемовин, так? І давайте щось з цим робити там, так? Але ми хочемо нагадати, що ми цінуємо вашу мудрість і ваші зусилля в налагодженні миру на цьому в Газі.
And now peace has been achieved. Hamas is no more, so peace has come. Of course, the main merit in this is not ours. We did nothing. This is exclusively your victory. This is exactly how the negotiations are conducted. Formally, everything looks polite and diplomatic, but the point is obvious. On the one hand, it's a subtle hint. On the other hand, it's a compliment that doesn't let you get offended. And at the same time, all the tasks have been accomplished. After all, Trump said, "We are for peace, we support it." Israel responds, "We are also in favor. We just didn't have time to do exactly what you wanted, but we realized what you said. And we did it for a long time. And they may even have taken into account the wishes regarding the conditions, for example, access to the coast in Gaza."
І зробили довгостроковий, там ще, знаєте, хотіли там, що там, шматочок пляжу в Газі.
If you want to master negotiation, resist pressure, and outplay stronger opponents while keeping everyone formally satisfied, Mr. Taras's course, Winning Negotiations, is for you. I believe in it, and you will too. The link is in the video description. Now to the question, will Trump's success in the Middle East push him to take a tougher stance against the Russian leader?
Успіх, як би він до нього вже не підійшов і хто б його не підвів Трампа на Близькому Сході, таки надихає його бути більш рішучим проти російського фюрера?
With Russia, the situation is much more complicated because, as I have already noted, Trump is still under pressure from the old American tradition of saving Russia. This country is convenient and profitable for certain circles in the United States, so they have constantly played political games with it. There is criticism in words, but actions often show otherwise. Despite all the efforts to save Russia, it is not possible, and the further we go, the more obvious it becomes. The reason is the deep contradiction between Russia and the Trump administration, particularly in the energy sector. Oil and gas is the key factor that they are unable to overcome. It is worth remembering that it was after Trump came to power that the Russian economy began to experience serious difficulties. Oil prices have fallen by about 15%, and Russia is already forced to cut its budget as oil and gas revenues are declining.
Адміністрацію Трампа, яку вони подолати ніколи не зможуть, тому що це проблематика велика. І дивіться, все ж таки російська економіка почала відчувати проблеми після приходу якраз Трампа до влади. Падіння ціну на нафту приблизно там 15%, і вони вже скорочують бюджет, нафтогазові доходи не так є.
Ukraine has greatly expanded its capabilities to strike at Russian infrastructure, including the oil industry. In this context, it no longer matters what the oil price is. If the attacks on ports and oil refineries continue systematically, Russia will not be able to export oil efficiently, even at a price of $200 per barrel. They can only watch, unable to export it. In addition, Saudi Arabia seems to have agreed to increase production, which will lead to lower world oil prices, another blow to the Russian economy. Russia also failed to ignite a large-scale war in the Middle East. Israel has launched such effective strikes against Iran that the conflict has not reached the expected scale. In fact, Israel controls Iran's airspace and can strike at any time. Despite this, Iranian oil exports continue, but the situation remains unstable. Israel is likely to continue to put pressure on Iran using various methods.
Не вийшло в війну влаштувати. Ну, фактично, зараз Ізраїль контролює повітряний простір Ірану. Куди хочеш, туди і бий. І при цьому, дивіться, вони не припиняють експорт нафти. Вона як опція існує, Але експорт нафти йде. Але я думаю, що там не закінчена історія. Я думаю, що Ізраїль все ж таки буде добиватися в різний спосіб.
Either a change of government or disintegration of Iran is the way to neutralize it as a threat. If Iran ceases to pose a threat, sanctions will not be lifted, and it will be forced to increase oil exports, which will again put pressure on Russia. In the context of Ukraine, the number of factors that influence Trump's position is growing. And this proves once again that in today's world, the one who is stronger, whether at the regional or global level, is right. Ukraine demonstrates the power to change minds. The Israeli model is quite appropriate here. Look at how Israel acts. It officially declares its desire for peace, but at the same time launches targeted strikes against strategic targets. Ukraine acts in the same way. It talks about peace, but systematically strikes at Russian territory, killing generals, aircraft, and infrastructure. And then you can turn to Trump. Donald, you have succeeded. You have won. It is thanks to you that the Russians are forced to retreat to the 1991 borders. And this will be a political victory that he can use.
Авіацію, все, що пов'язано. Тобто, а далі сказати, Дональд Фредович, ви все зробили, ви такий молодець, ви, звичайно, перемогли всіх. От, коли росіяни змушені були шурувати на кордоні 91-го року, так і ви молодець в першу чергу, тому що вони будуть поставлені в таке становище.
In the negotiation process, you should not just wait for it to develop. You need to look for leverage, determine where your strength lies. It can be military potential, pressure on the opponent's sensitive points, such as Trump's ratings, or the support of allies. Ukraine has new partners among European countries. For the first time, China publicly doubted Russia's ability to win. This is an important signal. Beijing seeks to balance Moscow's influence and clearly sees the real situation. Particularly telling was the moment when Xi Jinping, during his visit to Moscow, asked Zelenskyy to guarantee security during the parade, in effect recognizing Ukraine's strength. This should not be used as a game, but as a consistent strategy. Not to accept intermediate options, but to prove that Ukraine is capable of winning with a specific result, a return to the 1991 borders, not necessarily in the classical military sense, but through a symmetrical strategy, targeted strikes on critical targets, and even China will no longer be able to save Russia, nor will the United States.
Особливо, коли Сі Цзіньпінь, коли прилітав в Москву, просив Зеленського забезпечити йому спокій на параді, там, щоб нічого не літало і гарантувати фактично йому безпеку. Це визнання сили України. І ми повинні це завжди гратися. Те, що, не гратися, а послідовно доводити до цієї адміністрації. Не оцей проміжний варіант, який вони говорять, а те, що Україна може виграти цю війну. З конкретними результатами, як я говорив і продовжую говорити, з кордонами 91-го року. Не військова в такому класичному варіанті, лоб в лоб виграти, а симетрична. Україна може це зробити, вибиваючи точки, які є. І навіть Китай вже не врятує Росію, а не американці вже не врятують Росію.
If disintegration processes begin in the Russian Federation, especially in the economy, China will try to act cautiously. It wants to strike a balance, not to allow Russia to become too strong, but also not to allow it to become too weak. However, this is a conditional position. Our task is to make it clear to China that we are not interested in its balancing act. We want it to come to the right conclusion. Why does it need Moscow if its main goal is access to Siberian resources? To do this, we need to continue our strikes, in particular on facilities such as Urengoy, where gas and oil are pumped. And to ask the question directly, did you ask us for permission to extract? No. Did you ask for security guarantees? No. So the conversation should be different. Decide why you need Russia in this form. If you want it, take it away. We don't care. We are interested in specifics, in actions, in decisions, in results, and this applies to both China and the United States.
Ворушіться в правильному напрямку для того, щоб ви прийшли до того, навіщо вам взагалі Росія в такому вигляді потрібна. Хочете Сибір, забирайте, нам, в принципі, байдуже там, да? Ось, і так далі. Нас цікавить конкретика в конкретних речах. Так це стосується як китайців, так і стосується американців.
Absolutely. And we understand that with Trump, we will probably get closer to the 1991 borders faster, through strikes and pressure. We have almost 2,000 viewers with us. I would like to devote a few more minutes of your attention, Taras, to the topic of our European and American partners. The Kyiv Post reports that a meeting between President Zelenskyy, Keith Kellogg, and several European leaders is planned for July 10-11 in Rome during the Ukraine Recovery Conference. Expected attendees include Ursula von der Leyen, Friedrich Merz, Donald Tusk, and others. The first such conference took place in Lugano, Switzerland, in 2022. On July 10th, a coalition of partner countries is set to meet via video conference. However, Politico reports possible tensions due to differing approaches by Macron and Starmer toward the US president. These cracks raise concerns about unity in supporting Ukraine. The recovery conference is crucial, not just symbolically, but for real decisions on reconstruction, defense, aid, and long-term security. The key goal is to strengthen coordination and secure clear commitments.
Яка зараз їхня ключова мета? Бо розуміємо, що не тільки про відбудову будемо говорити, а й про зброю, напевно, про оборонні якісь контракти.
This story about the cracks reminded me of another diplomatic episode. About 6 months ago, Erdogan called Macron almost a monkey, and then they met in Albania and were quite friendly. This is conditional, of course, but the point is that conflicts are normal and should be taken in stride. Today there is a crack, tomorrow there is no crack. All of this is part of an ongoing negotiation process, where the main thing is to provide arguments and understand what you are trying to achieve. You need to look for common ground where interests intersect. And even if someone raises their voice during the negotiations, it is important not to lose focus. It is worth asking yourself, do we want to quarrel or achieve a result? You always need to turn the conversation into a constructive direction, and then it turns out that there are not so many real points of misunderstanding.
Треба запитати, чого ми хочемо досягти. Посваритися, чи чому ми тут час витрачаємо, так? Тобто повертати завжди в розумне русло розмову. І тоді вийде, що виявляється не так багато точок непорозумінь.
Disputes are natural. Every country has its own interests. Attitudes toward Trump or others may differ, but this rarely leads to catastrophe. The strength of Western society lies in its culture of strategic cooperation, despite disagreements. In contrast, we often think in terms of betrayal or victory, react emotionally, and lack a tradition of building lasting internal coalitions. Instead of dialogue, we too often choose resentment and division. It is an inadequate strategy to act against the grain and refuse to cooperate. Everyone understands that the strategy of interaction allows you to increase the common resource. When you cooperate, the pie grows and everyone can get more. It's the same here. Disputes are possible, but they don't necessarily lead to disaster. Our task is to skillfully use contradictions, for example, between France and the United States. The French can be told, if you don't like the Americans so much, why do you act like them? You are French. This is a direct manipulation, but it works. It is an influence through the perception of one's own identity. Appeal to the idea of grandeur de France, remind them that they are European leaders. Americans in turn can be told, you are a superpower. But look, the French are already acting faster. We believe that you should be the first. Of course, such things should not be said in the same room. They should be said in different rooms, in different formats.
Американцям сказати, ну да, ви ж наддержава. Ну бачите, французи вас вже перемагають, вони тут швидше рухаються. Ми вважаємо, що це не дуже правильно. Я думаю, що ви повинні бути першими. Ну, звичайно, це не в одному місці треба говорити, а в різних кімнатах.
Want to be just as effective? Check out Mr. Taras's course, Winning Negotiations. Link below. And yes, we see your questions. Taras, once again, why doesn't Ukraine launch massive drone strikes on Russian oil refineries, if it has the drones? First, the attacks are already happening. For example, the Ilya oil refinery in the Krasnodar territory was hit. Secondly, the SBU, the Ukrainian Defense Forces and the General Staff know better when and how to launch strikes, whether with millions or billions of drones. But this is not a question for the military, but for the government, in particular for Mr. Shmyhal. Where is the organization of weapons production? We must clearly understand that the army is fighting within the resources provided by the state. We should not think that the General Staff is sitting around and deliberately saving missiles. Military planning is always based on the worst-case scenario. It is a clear math. How many missiles there are? What are the stockpiles? What are the production rates? What are the priorities? And only then are decisions made about the scale and frequency of strikes. Next, the probability of hitting the target is calculated, and the worst-case scenario is always taken. For example, what will happen if the missile misses the target or misses? Do not think that the military has no desire to launch a massive drone strike. On the contrary, everyone is ready to do so. But the question is not one of desire, but of capability. And capabilities depend on the political leadership, which must provide the army with weapons. The problem is that the defense industry has not been fully funded from domestic resources. For example, Ukraine's banking system currently has about 700 billion hryvnias of free liquidity, and these funds could be used for defense. Taras, regarding claims that our internal struggle is fiercer than the external one, and again about Yermak. Some MPs say, let him go, he's effectively acting as head of government if he oversees Sviridенko and others. The Economist published an article that sparked public and media reaction. What do you think is behind it? I don't care what the Western media say anymore. First, I see that the roots of this publication are in Ukraine. They start posting genes to form a certain narrative inside the country. I read it. Someone writes something, some intrigues. They say they want to replace Shmyhal with Sviridенko. So what? This has been known for a long time. Just like the fact that Yermak has influence over the presidential office. He heads it. Zelenskyy himself said that he and Yermak are one team. People often ask how come they want to change the prime minister. But this is not news. By the way, it is important what China said. They will not support Russia so that it does not win. This indicates that Beijing is moving in the right direction, and this creates additional pressure, in particular on US policy. That is, we need to prove that Ukraine is strong and capable of winning. If someone wants to change the leadership and this will really improve the efficiency of work, then it should be so. If someone in the West is dissatisfied with something, it should not be decisive. Some of them want it to be over as soon as possible, so that it doesn't prevent them from continuing to work with Russian money. If changes in the government increase the efficiency of the state and its defense capabilities, then the opinions of those who are against it can be left aside. As Trump said, in the same place where he advised kissing when he talked about tariffs. By the way, in the same article, which is quite controversial, the authors contradict themselves. They write that Sviridенko is allegedly not politically engaged, although at the same time they note that she was raised by Yermak. I don't quite understand what not politically involved means. Her task is to organize the work. I often hear talk on various channels about a parliamentary presidential republic, about who can or cannot do what. But during martial law, the prime minister must ensure the production and functioning of the economy. If someone fails, they are replaced. Can the president's office, headed by Commander-in-Chief Zelenskyy, do this? Yes, it can. What is the problem? We are too fond of terms like political engagement. If a person is in the president's team, he or she follows his or her political line. And the responsibility, of course, lies with the president. The tandem of Yermak and Zelenskyy is one team, as Zelenskyy himself has repeatedly said.
А тандем Єрмака і Зеленського – це одна команда, про що Зеленський давно говорив.
Talking about someone managing the wrong things or the presidential office interfering in other areas is a constant topic of resentment. People often say, this is not in line with the Constitution. But the question is different. Do you need efficiency or formal compliance? The president's office has always had more influence in Ukraine due to the state structure. The president is elected by the people and bears full responsibility, unlike the prime minister, chosen by MPs, most of whom are unfamiliar to the public. Though once called the administration, the essence of the presidential office remains unchanged. Personally, I believe our constitution doesn't need a prime minister. In the US, for example, Trump was both head of state and government, fully responsible for the country's affairs.
Дивіться, як в Сполучених Штатах Америки. Трамп є головою одночасно уряду. Він відповідає за все, що коїться, і за економічну політику, і все, що коїться в країні.
And there is no constant intrigue. In addition, let me remind you that we live under the Constitution, which was written by Medvedchuk in 2004. Obviously, it was not created for the development of the state. If we talk about abolishing the institution of the Prime Minister, people will immediately start shouting about the usurpation of power, saying that everything is in one hand. But it is possible to expand the powers of the Parliament. I agree with this. Parliament should be an element of balance. In particular, it should have real control tools, investigation, supervision, and a simplified impeachment procedure, because the current impeachment procedure, to put it bluntly, is almost impossible to implement even under the best of circumstances. There should be a mutual balance, like in the American model, where the president has full executive power, but the parliament is able to effectively control. I agree with this. Of course, there are certain risks, but in a situation where such articles appear in the media, hinting at something, criticizing something, it is worth asking counter questions. For example, we signed a security agreement with the United States, right? With the previous president. It was stated there, $3 billion a year. And where are they? This is an official document. It turns out that even agreements with the United States no longer have any weight. That's why we need to be critical of all these statements, especially when they come from those who have been telling us about great values, institutions, and principles for years. As practice has shown, when something is not profitable for them, they do not care about values. They say, sit there and fight while we are slowly preparing for a war with Russia. Fight more, longer. Can they give more money for Ukraine's victory? They can. But instead we hear, we haven't finished our coffee yet, we haven't completed our institutions yet.
Можуть вони дати більше грошей для виграшу України? Можуть. Але, це ж не таке. Ой, у нас там, знаєте, ми тут ще каву не допили, ми тут ще інституцію не добудували.
Yes, Taras, it all starts with ourselves. Thank you for helping us understand these complex issues. See you tomorrow at 11 Saturday. Take care and goodbye. Taras Zahorodniy, as always, clear and professional. I'm Iryna Uzlova. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Mr. Taras's YouTube channel, link below, and check out the Winning Negotiations course. And don't forget to subscribe to YouTube on the 24th. See you soon.
Переговори для перемог по життю і по бізнесу. І на YouTube 24-го теж не забудьте. Бережіть себе, побачимося і переможемо.